Before we begin tonight's journey, a quick note. If you enjoy these relaxing stories, you can also listen on Spotify. Simply use the link in the description below to follow the podcast and enjoy every episode anytime, even with your screen off. Now get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the story begin.
In the beginning, there was winter. Not the winter we know today, with its predictable seasons and measured cold, but the long night itself, a darkness so complete that it swallowed the world. And when that darkness finally broke, when the dawn came at last after a generation of terror and ice, the men who survived were changed forever. Among them stood the man who would become legend, Bran the Builder, the founder of House Stark. But before we speak of Bran, we must understand what he built upon. The North, even in the age of heroes, was already ancient. It was a land shaped by the first men, those bronze-wielding warriors who crossed the land bridge from Essos thousands of years before the Andals ever set foot in Westeros. These were hard people, forged by a hard land. They worshipped the old gods, the nameless spirits of forest and stream, and they carved faces into the weirwood trees so their gods might watch over them. The first men had not come to an empty land. The children of the forest were already there, small, dark-eyed beings who sang to the trees and worked magic that the first men could never understand. For centuries, the first men and the children warred. The children used their magic to shatter the land bridge itself, creating what we now call the broken arm of dawn. They called down hammers of water upon the neck, trying to separate the north from the southern kingdoms. But the first men were too many, too determined, and too strong. Eventually, the war ended, not with conquest, but with understanding. On the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye, the first men and the children made a pact. The first men would take the open lands, the coasts and the meadows and the hills. The children would keep the forests. And the first men, in respect for their new allies, would abandon their own gods and take up the worship of the old gods instead. They would carve faces in the weirwoods, just as the children did. They would remember. This was the world into which the long night fell. We do not know exactly when it happened. The masters argue about dates, about whether it was 8,000 years ago, or merely 6,000, or perhaps even less. The records from that time are not records at all, but songs and stories passed down through countless generations. What we do know is this: darkness came, and with it came the others. The others were death itself, given form. Creatures of ice and cold, wielding blades that could shatter steel, commanding armies of the dead. They came from the far north, from the lands of always winter, and they swept down upon the world of men like a killing frost. The children's magic could not stop them. The bronze swords of the first men shattered against their frozen armor. Entire kingdoms fell. Entire peoples were wiped from the earth or raised again as mindless servants of the cold. But humanity did not break. In their darkest hour, a hero emerged. The maesters call him Azor Ahai. The red priests of R'hllor say he was the chosen of their god, wielding a burning sword called Lightbringer. In the north, they speak of a different name, a different story, but the result was the same. The others were driven back. The long night ended. Dawn came again. And in the aftermath, in those early days when men were still learning to trust the sun again, Bran the Builder rose to prominence. We know almost nothing certain about him. We do not know when he was born or when he died. We do not know if he was a king before the long night or if he became one after. Some Meisters even doubt he was a single person at all, suggesting instead that Bran the Builder might be a title given to several men, or a legendary figure who accumulated the deeds of many. But the legends are clear enough. Bran the Builder built Winterfell. He raised Storm's End for Durin Godsgrief. He designed the High Tower at Old Town. Most importantly, most incredibly, he built the Wall. The Wall. Even now, 8,000 years later, it stands. 700 feet of solid ice, stretching 300 miles from the Bay of Seals to the Gorge. 19 castles guard its length, though only 3 are still manned in the present day. It is the greatest structure ever raised by human hands, and it was built in an age when men barely had iron, let alone the tools and knowledge we possess today. How did he do it? The legends say he had help, that the children of the forest worked their magic into its foundation. The giants helped raise the ice blocks, using their enormous strength to lift what men could not. Some even whisper that spells were woven into the wall itself, ancient wards that prevent the others from passing. Whether these stories are true or merely the embellishments of time, we cannot say. But the wall stands. That much is fact. And Winterfell, the great castle of the north, the seat of House Stark for millennia, built, the stories say, over hot springs that keep its halls warm, even in the deepest winter. The castle's design is like nothing else in Westeros. Its walls are thick and strong, but they lack the elegant symmetry of southern castles. They were built for function, not beauty, built to endure. The legends tell us that Bran the Builder constructed Winterfell over the very spot where the first men and the children of the forest made their pact, that the hot springs beneath the castle are a gift from the old gods themselves, a sign of favor, that the ancient crypts beneath Winterfell go down into the earth for levels beyond counting, holding the stone kings of winter in their iron crowns, their dire wolves at their feet. Whether Bran the Builder founded House Stark or merely strengthened it, we cannot know. But from him the line descended, father to son, brother to brother, across thousands of years. The Starks became the kings of winter. They took the direwolf as their sigil, that great beast of the northern forests, larger and more savage than any common wolf. And they took their words. Winter is coming. Those words tell us everything about the Starks. Where other houses boast of their strength or their pride, the Starks offer only a warning, a reminder. Winter is coming. Darkness returns. The world is hard and cold and unforgiving, and only the prepared will survive. It is not a grand motto. It is not an inspiring battle cry. It is simply the truth, spoken plainly, as the North speaks all truths. The connection between House Stark and the old gods runs deeper than religion. The Starks are not merely worshippers. In their veins, according to legend, runs the blood of the first men undiluted by Andal conquest. When the Andals swept across Westeros 6,000 years ago, converting the southern kingdoms to the faith of the Seven and drowning the weirwood groves in blood, the north remained unconquered. The Neck, that narrow swampland controlled by House Reed, proved impassable to southern armies. The Andals never made it past Moat Cailin in any significant numbers. This isolation preserves something in the north, the old ways, the old blood. The Starks, more than any other house, embody this preservation. Every lord of Winterfell tends the godswood personally. Every Stark child learns the names of the old gods though the gods have no names, only the faces carved in the trees. Every Stark who dies is entombed in the crypts below, their stone likeness watching in eternal silence. But there is another gift the Starks carry, one spoken of only in whispers, dismissed by Meisters as superstition, the gift of warging, the ability to slip one's mind into the body of a beast, to see through its eyes, to control its movements. Direwolves, ravens, even cats and horses. The stories say that some Starks could do this, that some still can, that this is why their bond with their direwolves runs so deep, why the Stark children of old were often found with wolves at their sides. The Maesters scoff at such tales. They point out that warging, if it exists at all, is found among the wildlings beyond the wall, not among civilized lords. They suggest that the legends of Stark wargs are nothing more than poetic metaphors, ways of saying that the Starks understood wolves, or that they were fierce in battle. But the small folk of the North believe. And in the North, the small folk often know things that the Meisters have forgotten. In those early days after the Long Night, the North was not unified. There were many kingdoms, many peoples. The Barrow kings ruled from the Great Barrow, near what is now Barrowton. The Red Kings of the Dreadfort, ancestors of House Bolton, held the eastern lands. The Marsh Kings controlled the Neck. The Warg King ruled his own domain, commanding great packs of wolves. And there were others, smaller kingdoms that have been lost to history entirely. Bran the Builder's descendants, the kings of Winter, were merely one power among many. But they had Winterfell. They had the Wall, which gave them prestige as defenders of all mankind. And they had something else, a determination, a patience, a willingness to endure through the longest winter, to outlast their enemies rather than simply outfight them. Century by century, the Starks expanded, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through simple survival when their rivals destroyed themselves through folly or ambition. The details of most of these conflicts are lost to us. We have names, fragments of songs, cryptic entries in old books written by maesters who themselves were copying from sources they did not fully trust. What we know is the result. By the time the Andals invaded Westeros, the Starks were already the dominant power in the north. The other kings had bent the knee or been destroyed. The Barrow kings were gone. The Red Kings had become the Boltons, powerful still, but subordinate to Winterfell. The Marsh Kings had been defeated, though their descendants, the Reeds, remained as loyal bannermen. The Warg King was a distant memory. The North was vast, larger than all the southern kingdoms combined, but it was also sparse, its people spread thin across endless forests and frozen plains. The Starks did not rule through fear alone, though they could be harsh when necessary. They ruled through a kind of compact. The North was a hard land that demanded hard people. The Starks understood this. They did not demand Southern-style devotion or flowery oaths. They demanded loyalty, competence, and honesty. In return, they offered protection and justice. This was the Stark way. This was what Bran the Builder had begun, whether he knew it or not. A house built not on wealth or dragons or divine right, but on endurance. On the simple fact that winter comes, and when it does, the North needs someone strong enough to lead it through the darkness. The old gods watched from their weirwood faces. The hot springs flowed beneath Winterfell's stones, and in the crypts the dead kings waited in their iron crowns, their stone eyes watching, their direwolves curled at their feet. Generation after generation, the Starks added to that silent company, each lord, each king, another statue in the dark, another reminder that all men die, but some leave something worth remembering. Bran the Builder had built more than walls and castles. He had built a legacy, a house that would endure for 8,000 years, through the rise and fall of kingdoms, through the coming of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the Targaryens, through winters that lasted a generation and summers that made men forget that winter existed. And always, always, the words remained the same. Winter is coming, not as a threat, not as a boast, simply as truth. The North remembers, and what the North remembers, first and foremost, is that the world is hard, that darkness always returns, and that only the prepared survive. This was the foundation. This was the beginning. From Bran the Builder to the kings of winter who followed, House Stark was never about glory or conquest. It was about survival, about duty, about being the shield that guards the realms of men, even when the realms of men do not know they need guarding. The age of heroes was ending. The age of iron and war and kingdom building was beginning. And in the north, in their ancient castle built over hot springs and old magic, the Starks waited. They had waited through the long night. They would wait through whatever came next. Because that is what Starks do. They endure. The age of heroes faded into legend, but the Starks endured. For thousands of years, they ruled the North not as mere lords, but as kings. The kings of winter, they called themselves. And that title was not poetic metaphor. It was literal truth. They were kings crowned in iron, ruling from Winterfell. And the winter they embodied was both the season and the hard justice they dispensed. The kings of winter were not like the flowery kings of the south. They did not hold tournaments or write songs about chivalry. They did not build sept after sept to appease gods who demanded gold and incense. The kings of winter ruled a land where survival was never guaranteed, where a harsh winter could kill more people than any war, where the wall stood as an eternal reminder that darkness had once consumed the world and might do so again. We know the names of many kings of winter, though the deeds of most are lost to time. The oldest names appear in the deepest levels of Winterfell's crypts, carved into stone statues that have stood for millennia. Brandon, the Builder's descendants, Brandon the Breaker, Brandon the Burner, Brandon the Shipwright. The Starks favoured certain names, passing them down through generations like treasured heirlooms. Brandon, Eddard, Rickard, Roderick, John, Cregan, Benjen. Each name carried the weight of ancestors, the expectation that the bearer would prove worthy of those who came before. Some kings of winter became legends in their own right. Theon Stark, called the Hungry Wolf, was one such man. He lived roughly 1,000 years after the Long Night, though exact dates from this period are unreliable at best. What we know of Theon comes from songs and stories, but the songs agree on the essential facts. The Hungry Wolf was a warrior king, fierce and relentless. When slavers from across the narrow sea raided the northern coast, stealing men, women, and children to sell in the markets of Essos, Theon Stark did not merely drive them away. He gathered his strength and crossed the sea himself. He burned the Slava cities. He freed the northern captives and brought them home. And he made it clear that the North was not prey for foreign raiders. The message was simple and brutal. Touch what is ours, and we will destroy you utterly. This was the Stark way. not aggression for its own sake, but absolute ruthlessness in defense of their own. The North was harsh enough without foreign enemies adding to its troubles. The hungry wolf understood this, and he made certain that the Slava cities understood it as well. Jon Stark, another early king, defeated the Marsh King and added the neck to the dominion of Winterfell. The Marsh King ruled from the moat, that ancient fortress now called Moat Cailin, commanding the Crannog men who could disappear into the swamps like ghosts. The Crannog men were not warriors in the traditional sense. They did not fight in shield walls or charge on horseback. They used poisoned arrows and guerrilla tactics, appearing and vanishing like mist. But Jon Stark found a way. The details are lost, but the result is clear. The Marsh King fell. The Crannog men bent the knee, and the descendants of the Marsh King, House Reed, became among the most loyal of Stark bannermen. This too was the Stark way. Defeat your enemies, yes, but then treat them fairly. Give them reason to serve you beyond simple fear. The North needed every house, every stronghold, every fighting man it could muster. The Starks understood that conquered peoples made poor allies, but respected peoples made strong ones. Not all the kings of winter were conquerors. Some were builders, like their founder. Some were lawmakers. Some were warriors who defended the North from wildling invasions or settled disputes between quarreling bannermen. The King of Winter was expected to be many things: judge and general, builder and diplomat, executioner when necessary, and above all, the protector of the North. But there is one King of Winter whose story stands apart from all others, a story so dark that the Starks themselves tried to erase it from history. The Night's King. According to legend, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch was a Stark. Some tales say he was a younger brother of the King of Winter. Some say he was a bastard son. The details vary, but the core story remains consistent. This Lord Commander, whose true name has been forbidden and forgotten, saw a woman in the haunted forest. A woman with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. He loved her, or perhaps she ensorcelled him. The legends are unclear on this point, and perhaps the distinction does not matter. He brought her back to the Night Fort, the largest castle on the wall, and made her his bride. And then he declared himself king, the Night's King. For 13 years, he ruled the wall, sacrificing to the others, performing dark rites that the singers will not even name. The Night's King might have ruled forever if the alliance against him had not formed. The King of Winter in Winterfell and Joramun, the king beyond the wall, joined forces. Together, they marched on the Night Fort. Together, they broke the Night's King's power and cast him down. And when it was done, the King of Winter ordered every record destroyed. The Night's King's true name was forbidden. His very existence was nearly erased from history. But the stories survived. They always do. And they serve as a reminder that even Starks can fall into darkness, that even a man born to duty and honor can be corrupted, that the blood of the first men, for all its strength, does not guarantee virtue. The maesters debate whether the Night's King truly existed. They point out that the timeline makes no sense, that the story contains too many supernatural elements, that it reads more like a cautionary tale than actual history. But in the North, people believe. And whether the Night's King was real or legend, the lesson remains the same. The wall is not just a barrier against outside threats. It is a reminder of what happens when men forget their duty. The wars between the Starks and the Boltons are another dark thread running through northern history. House Bolton, with their seat at the Dreadfort, were once kings in their own right. The Red Kings, they call themselves, and their sigil tells you everything you need to know about them. A flayed man hanging upside down. The Boltons practice flaying as an art form, as a method of execution and torture, as a way of inspiring absolute terror in their enemies. For thousands of years, the Boltons warred with the Starks. The details of most of these conflicts are lost, but certain stories survived. Stories of Bolton kings who wore cloaks made of Stark skin. Stories of battles fought in winter storms where the snow ran red with blood. Stories of treachery and vengeance that spanned generations. Eventually, the Boltons bent the knee. They gave up their crown and accepted the Starks as their overlords. But they never truly forgave. They never forgot that they had once been kings themselves. The Starks knew this, of course. They knew that the Boltons were dangerous, that the flayed man's loyalty was always questionable. But the North needed the Boltons. The Dreadfort guarded the eastern approaches. Bolton men were fierce fighters, and so the Starks kept them close, watched them carefully, and hoped that the bonds of vassalage would hold. This uneasy alliance would last for thousands of years, right up to the present day. The Boltons would serve the Starks, but always with the knowledge that they had once been kings, that they had once stood as equals, that perhaps one day they might rise again. The expansion of Stark power was not always violent. Many houses joined the Kingdom of Winter through marriage or mutual agreement. The mountain clans, those fierce warriors who lived in the high places west of Winterfell, never formally bent the knee, but acknowledged the Stark kings as their leaders. The Umbers of Last Hearth, the Karstarks, who were themselves a Stark offshoot, the Mormonts of Bear Island, the Manderleys, who would come later from the south. Each house had its own story, its own reasons for binding itself to Winterfell. But all of them recognized something in the Starks, a kind of fundamental reliability. The Starks were hard, yes. They could be ruthless. They executed deserters from the Night's Watch without hesitation. They punished oath-breakers severely, but they were also fair. They listened to their people. They did not levy crushing taxes or demand impossible services. When winter came, Winterfell's granaries would open to feed the small folk. When raiders came from beyond the wall, the Stark King would ride out to meet them. This was the bargain. Loyalty for protection. Honest service for honest rule. It was not a bargain written down in flowery language or sealed with elaborate ceremonies. It was simply understood, and for thousands of years it held. The kings of winter faced threats from all directions. From the south, occasionally, when ambitious Andal kings tried to push northward and were bloodied in the neck. From the sea, when iron-born reavers raided the western coast, before the Starks drove them out and gave those lands to House Mormont. From beyond the wall, constantly, as wildling kings periodically gathered enough strength to assault the wall or sneak around it through the Bay of Seals. Each threat was met, each challenge was overcome. Not always easily, not always without cost. The North paid for its independence in blood, generation after generation. But it remained independent. It remained unconquered. It remained itself. The culture that developed under the Kings of Winter was distinct from the rest of Westeros. While the South worshipped the Seven and built great septs, the North kept faith with the old gods, while Southern knights swore elaborate oaths and fought in tournaments. Northern warriors fought with practical weapons and cared little for ceremony, while Southern lords schemed and played the Game of Thrones in their sun-drenched castles. Northern lords dealt plainly with one another, knowing that deceit was a luxury they could not afford when winter might kill them all, regardless of their schemes. This is not to say the North was simple or unsophisticated. The Starks maintained their own kind of complexity. They understood politics, understood power, understood that ruling required more than just a sword. But their politics were different, more direct, built on personal relationships and ancient loyalties rather than temporary alliances and clever betrayals. The small folk of the North loved their Stark kings in a way that Southern peasants rarely loved their lords, not because the Starks were kind, though they could be, not because life was easy under their rule, because it was not, but because the Starks were there. When the cold came and the crops failed, the Starks did not retreat to their castles and leave the people to starve. They organized, they distributed food, they rationed supplies, they made sure that those who could survive did survive. And when the Stark King rode out to face an enemy, he did not send peasant levies forward, while he stayed safe in the rear. He fought at the front. He risked his own life. Many kings of winter died in battle, died defending the North, and the North remembered this. The North always remembers. In the deepest parts of Winterfell's crypts, the oldest kings sit in eternal silence. Their iron crowns rust slowly in the darkness. Their stone direwolves crouch beside them. The deeper you go, the older the statues become, until you reach levels where even the names have worn away, where the faces have been smoothed by time, until they are barely recognizable as human. But they are there, all of them. Every king of winter who ruled from Winterfell, every Stark lord who held the North together through winter and war and darkness. They watch, they wait, they remember. This was the legacy that each new king of winter inherited. Not just a crown and a castle, but the weight of 8,000 years. The expectation that he would prove worthy of his ancestors, that he would defend the North as they had defended it, that when his time came, when he died and was laid in the crypts with an iron sword across his lap to keep the spirits in their graves, the next generation would speak his name with respect. Winter is coming. The words were not just a warning to enemies. They were a reminder to the Starks themselves that their rule was not about glory or wealth or power for its own sake. It was about preparation, about duty, about ensuring that when the cold and darkness came, as they always did, the North would survive. The kings of winter were not perfect. They made mistakes. Some were cruel. Some were weak. Some made choices that brought suffering to their people. But they endured for thousands of years through the age of heroes and the coming of the Andals and the Rhoynar, through winters that killed half the population and summers that made men grow soft. The Starks ruled the North, and the North was stronger for it. For 8,000 years, the Starks had been kings. For 8,000 years, they had answered to no one, bowed to no foreign power, acknowledged no authority higher than their own. And then, in the span of a single afternoon, everything changed. The dragons came to Westeros, and the age of the kings of winter came to an end. Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with a small army 3 dragons, and an ambition that seemed impossible. He intended to conquer all of Westeros, to unite the 7 kingdoms under a single crown. The southern kings laughed at him. They had armies numbering in the tens of thousands. They had castles that had never fallen. They had knights in shining armor and proud histories stretching back millennia. And then Aegon unleashed his dragons upon the field of fire, and the laughter stopped. 4,000 men burned to death in a single afternoon. Kings who had seemed invincible bent the knee or died. Castles that had never fallen opened their gates in terror. The dragons changed everything. In Winterfell, Torrhen Stark watched and waited. He was the king of winter, the lord of Winterfell, the inheritor of 8,000 years of Stark rule. He commanded the loyalty of every house in the north. He could field an army of 30,000 men, all of them hardened warriors accustomed to fighting wildlings and surviving the harshest winters in Westeros. By all rights, he should have fought. And indeed, that was his first instinct. Torrhen called his banners. The northern lords answered. 30,000 men gathered, the largest army the north had fielded in the living memory. They marched south, ready to meet the Targaryen invaders, ready to defend northern independence as their ancestors had defended it against the Andals and every other threat. But as Torrhen led his army south, news reached him. News of what dragons could do. News of the field of fire, where Aegon and his sisters had turned an army into ash. News of Harrenhal, where the greatest castle in Westeros had been melted like a candle, its proud king cooked alive inside his own armor. News that made it clear that courage and numbers and ancient pride would not be enough. Torrhen Stark did something that no king of winter had ever done before. He stopped his army at the Trident, and he thought about what was coming, not just for himself, not just for his pride, but for the North, for his people, for the future. The truth was simple and terrible. If Torrhen fought Aegon, his army would burn. The dragons would sweep across the northern lines like death itself. Thousands of men would die screaming. And after they were dead, after the snow ran red with blood and the very ground was scorched black, Aegon would still conquer the north. The dragons made victory impossible. The only question was how many northerners would die before the inevitable happened. So Torrhen Stark made a choice that would haunt his name for generations, though it was perhaps the bravest choice any Stark had ever made. He bent the knee. He crossed the Trident alone, leaving his army behind, and he knelt before Aegon Targaryen. He gave up his crown. He gave up his independence. He became not a king, but a warden of the North, serving at the pleasure of the Iron Throne. His own men called him the King Who Knelt. Some said it with respect, understanding the impossible position he had faced. Others said it with bitterness, believing he had betrayed everything the Starks stood for. But Torrhen had made his calculation. Better to preserve the North by bending than to destroy it by fighting. Better to lose a crown than to lose everything. Aegon, for his part, honored Torrhen's surrender. The North kept its old laws, its old customs, its worship of the old gods. The Starks remained the preeminent power north of the Neck, answering only to the Iron Throne itself. And in exchange, the North was spared the devastation that had consumed the southern kingdoms. No northern castle was burned. No northern army was incinerated. The transition from independence to vassalage was, by the standards of Aegon's conquest, remarkably bloodless. But something had changed. The Starks were no longer kings. They were great lords, yes, wardens of the North. But they served a higher power now. The Iron Crown that had sat on Stark heads for 8,000 years was gone, sent to the newly forged Iron Throne as a symbol of submission. For the next 300 years, the Starks would navigate this new reality. They would serve the Targaryens mostly faithfully through the reigns of multiple kings and through crises that would shake the foundations of the realm. But they would never forget what they had been. In the crypts beneath Winterfell, the kings of winter still sat in their stone silence, their iron crowns slowly rusting away, and every Stark who descended those stairs was reminded that their house had once been sovereign, and that sovereignty had been traded away for survival. The relationship between the Starks and the Targaryens was complex. Unlike the southern houses, who often intermarried with the Targaryens and became deeply entangled in their dynastic politics, the Starks maintained a careful distance. There were no Stark Targaryen marriages, no northern lords jockeying for position at the royal court. The Starks stayed in Winterfell, ruled the north, and largely avoided the dangerous games being played in King's Landing. But that distance could not protect them from everything. When the Targaryens went to war with themselves, when the dragons danced and the realm bled, the North could not remain neutral forever. The Dance of the Dragons was the first great crisis of Targaryen rule. King Viserys I died leaving the succession in dispute. His daughter Rhaenyra claimed the throne, as Viserys had named her his heir. But Viserys' son Aegon, born of his second wife, was crowned instead. The realm split. Dragons fought dragons. Entire regions were devastated. The Starks, under Lord Cregan Stark, chose to support Rhaenyra, not because of any particular love for her cause, but because oaths mattered. Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir, and the lords of Westeros, including the Starks, had sworn to uphold that decision. To the northern way of thinking, this made the choice simple. An oath was an oath. Cregan gathered his strength and marched south with a massive northern army. But by the time he arrived, the war was effectively over. The dragons were dead or scattered. Rhaenyra was dead, murdered by her own brother. Aegon II was dying from his wounds. The realm was exhausted, starving, and desperate for peace. What followed became known as the Hour of the Wolf. For a single day, Cregan Stark held more power than perhaps any hand of the king before or since. He arrived at King's Landing with 20,000 northerners at his back, an army that had not been ground down by years of war. He could have made himself king, some whispered. He could have done anything. But Cregan Stark did not want power for its own sake. He wanted justice. He put the worst war criminals on trial. He executed those who had betrayed their oaths or committed atrocities. And then, after a single day as Hand of the King, he resigned. He arranged for a regency council to rule until the boy King Aegon III came of age. And then he went home. The Hour of the Wolf demonstrated something important about the Starks. They did not crave power. They did not scheme to advance themselves. When they had power, they used it to establish justice and order, and then they gave it up. This was not the behavior of typical great lords, who would have leveraged such an opportunity to enrich themselves and their house for generations. But the Starks were not typical great lords. The Blackfyre rebellions presented another test. These civil wars, sparked by the legitimized bastard Daemon Blackfire's claim to the Iron Throne, would plague the realm for 5 generations. Each rebellion forced the great houses to choose sides. Each rebellion risked tearing the realm apart. The Starks consistently supported the Targaryen king, not out of love for the Targaryens necessarily, but out of that same respect for oaths and established order. The sitting king was the rightful king. Rebellion against him was oath-breaking, and oath-breaking was something the Starks could not countenance. Northern armies marched south in multiple Blackfire rebellions. Northern lords died on battlefields far from home, fighting for a throne they had no personal stake in, defending a dynasty that was not their own. But the alternative was chaos. The alternative was breaking the peace that Torrhen Stark had purchased with his crown, and that the Starks would not do. This loyalty earned the Starks a reputation. They were seen as reliable, steadfast, perhaps even naive, while other great houses played both sides, hedging their bets and positioning themselves to profit regardless of who won. The Starks chose their side and stuck with it. This made them valuable allies. It also made them predictable. And in the Game of Thrones, predictability could be a weakness, but the Starks maintained their independence in other ways. They kept the old gods when the rest of the realm worshipped the Seven. They kept northern customs, northern justice, northern ways of doing things. When a deserter from the Night's Watch was caught in the north, a Stark lord executed him personally. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. That was the northern way, and 300 years of Targaryen rule had not changed it. The wall remained a particular concern for the Starks. As wardens of the north, they had a special responsibility to support the Night's Watch. They sent men, supplies, and political support. They made certain that the younger sons of northern houses understood that service on the wall was honorable, not shameful. They personally visited Castle Black, inspected the fortifications, and listened to the complaints and needs of the Black brothers. This attention to the wall seemed quaint to southern lords. The Night's Watch was a dumping ground for criminals and bastards, they thought, a relic of a bygone age, guarding against threats that no longer existed. But the Starks remembered. They remembered the long night. They remembered the others. They remembered what the wall was truly for, even if the rest of the realm had forgotten. The Mad King's reign brought the relationship between the Starks and Targaryens to its breaking point. Aerys II, Targaryen, had started his rule as a promising young king, but madness consumed him. He grew paranoid, cruel, and increasingly unstable. He burned men alive for imagined slights. He hoarded wildfire beneath King's Landing, planning to burn the entire city rather than let it fall to his enemies. He saw traitors everywhere, and his justice grew more savage with each passing year. When Brandon Stark, the eldest son of Lord Rickard Stark, rode to King's Landing demanding the release of his sister, Lyanna, who had been allegedly kidnapped by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, he made a terrible mistake. He went straight to the Red Keep and called for Rhaegar to come out and die. In any normal time, this would have been rash, but understandable. A brother defending his sister's honor. But these were not normal times, and Aerys was not a normal king. He arrested Brandon for treason. He arrested Brandon's companions. And then he summoned their fathers to court to answer for their sons' crimes. Lord Rickard Stark answered the summons. He came to King's Landing expecting some kind of trial, some opportunity to defend himself and his son. What he got was madness. Aerys demanded trial by combat. Rickard agreed, choosing combat as his champion. But Aerys declared that fire was the champion of House Targaryen. Rickard was suspended from the rafters in his armor while a fire was lit beneath him. Brandon was placed in a strangulation device with his sword just out of reach. As Rickard cooked alive in his armor, Brandon strangled himself, trying to reach the sword to save his father. The Mad King murdered the Lord of Winterfell and his heir in the most brutal, sadistic fashion imaginable. And then he demanded that Jon Arryn, who had fostered both Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon, send him the heads of his 2 wards. Jon Arryn refused. He called his banners instead, and the realm exploded into civil war. Robert's Rebellion, as it came to be called, was the war that ended the Targaryen dynasty. Robert Baratheon, who had been betrothed to Lyanna Stark, claimed the throne. Eddard Stark, who had become Lord of Winterfell after his father and brother's murders, fought alongside Robert. Jon Arryn provided political legitimacy and military strength. Together, they toppled a dynasty that had ruled for 300 years. The Starks had remained loyal to the Targaryens through everything, through the Dance of the Dragons, through 5 Blackfire rebellions, through good kings and bad. But when the Mad King murdered Rickard and Brandon, when he demanded Ned Stark's head for no crime other than existing, that loyalty shattered. The oath that Torrhen Stark had sworn, the compact that had kept the North bound to the Iron Throne for 3 centuries, was broken by Aerys himself. Eddard Stark fought in Robert's Rebellion not to claim power, but to survive, to avenge his father and brother, to rescue his sister. He fought at the Trident, where Robert killed Prince Rhaegar in single combat. He fought at King's Landing, arriving after the Lannisters had already sacked the city and murdered the remaining Targaryen children. And he went to the Tower of Joy in the Mountains of Dawn to find his sister. What happened there remains shrouded in mystery and sorrow. Eddard arrived with 6 companions to find the tower guarded by 3 of the greatest knights of the King's Guard. 7 fought 3, and when it was over, only Eddard and Howland Reed survived. Lyanna was dying. What she told Eddard in those final moments, what promise he made to her, remained his secret for the rest of his life. When Eddard returned to Winterfell, he brought with him a bastard son, Jon Snow. He claimed born of a woman he had loved during the war. This admission shocked everyone who knew Ned Stark. He was honorable to a fault, devoted to his wife, not the kind of man who would father a bastard. But Ned would not speak of Jon's mother. He would not justify himself. He simply raised the boy alongside his own true-born children and refused to discuss the matter further. The cost of the Targaryen era was measured in Stark blood and Stark honor. Torrhen had given up his crown to preserve his people. Cregan had dispensed justice and then walked away from power. Stark armies had fought in southern wars, defending a dynasty that ultimately turned on them. And in the end, the Mad King's madness had killed Lord Rickard and Brandon, had sparked a rebellion that killed thousands, and had left scars that would never fully heal. The Targaryen dragons were gone. The dynasty was broken. Robert Baratheon sat the Iron Throne, with Eddard Stark as his closest friend and ally. A new age had begun, but the Starks remained what they had always been: wardens of the North, keepers of the old ways, servants of duty and honor, even when that service brought them nothing but grief. In the crypts beneath Winterfell, new statues joined the ancient kings. Rickard Stark, murdered by a mad king. Brandon Stark, strangled trying to save his father. They took their place among the generations of Starks who had gone before, their stone eyes watching, their iron swords across their laps. The kings of winter were long gone, but the wolves remained, diminished perhaps, bloodied certainly, but still standing, still enduring, still remembering. Winter is coming. The words had not changed, and neither, in the ways that mattered most, had the Starks. Eddard Stark never wanted to be Lord of Winterfell. That honor was meant for his older brother Brandon. Ned was the second son, the spare, the one who could afford to be gentle where Brandon was fierce, thoughtful where Brandon was bold. Ned was sent to the Vale as a ward of Jon Arryn, a common practice among great houses, designed to build alliances and teach young lords the ways of other kingdoms. There, in the Eyrie, high above the world, Ned formed the friendships that would define his life. Robert Baratheon was everything Ned was not. Loud where Ned was quiet, passionate where Ned was measured, a warrior who loved battle and wine and women with equal enthusiasm. But despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, Robert and Ned became as close as brothers. They trained together in the yards of the Eyrie. They hunted in the mountains of the moon. They learned what it meant to be lords, to command men, to bear responsibility. Jon Arryn was a good foster father. He taught them honor, duty, and justice. He showed them that power was not just about strength or wealth, but about wisdom and restraint. These lessons shaped both young men, though they would apply them in very different ways. Robert would become a great warrior and a terrible king. Ned would become a great lord and a terrible player of the Game of Thrones. Ned's childhood in Winterfell had been happy by all accounts. He had Brandon, who would inherit everything and bore that weight with confidence. He had Benjen, the youngest brother, always laughing, always getting into mischief. He had Lyanna, his sister, who was as wild and fierce as any of her brothers. Lyanna could ride better than most men. She had the wolf blood, people said, that wildness that sometimes appeared in Stark children, making them restless and bold and dangerous. Everything changed at the tourney at Harrenhal. It was the greatest tourney in living memory, bringing together knights and lords from all corners of the realm. Robert was there, already betrothed to Lyanna, already planning their future together. Brandon was there, representing House Stark, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was there, silver-haired and sad-eyed, playing his harp and winning the tournament. What happened next would spark a war. After Rhaegar won the tournament, he rode past his own wife Aelia and placed the crown of winter roses in Lyanna's lap, naming her the Queen of Love and Beauty. The crowd fell silent. This was an insult to Aelia, a shocking breach of protocol, and a dangerous gesture toward a woman already betrothed to Robert Baratheon. Some saw it as romantic. Others saw it as the first move in a tragedy. Within a year, Lyanna was gone, allegedly kidnapped by Rhaegar. Brandon rode to King's Landing in fury, demanding Rhaegar's head. And the Mad King murdered Brandon and Lord Rickard, turning a personal crisis into a rebellion that would destroy a dynasty. Eddard Stark, the second son who never expected to rule, suddenly became Lord of Winterfell. At 20 years old, he inherited a great house, vast responsibilities, and a burning need for vengeance. His father and brother were dead. His sister was missing. The Mad King was demanding his head. There was no choice but to fight. Robert's rebellion was the war that defined Ned's generation. He fought at the Trident, where Robert shattered Rhaegar's breastplate with his warhammer and sent rubies scattering into the river. He raced to King's Landing, only to find that Tywin Lannister had already sacked the city, that Jaime Lannister had already killed the Mad King, that the Targaryen children had already been murdered in their beds. Ned and Robert quarreled over those dead children. Robert saw them as dragonspawn, threats that needed to be eliminated. Ned saw them as innocent babes murdered by Lannister treachery. The argument revealed a fundamental difference between the two friends. Robert was pragmatic, willing to forgive any crime if it served his purposes. Ned was honorable, unable to stomach the murder of children regardless of their name. But the worst was yet to come. Ned rode south to Dorne, to the Tower of Joy, where 3 of the greatest knights of the King's Guard stood watch over something. They should have been protecting their king or the royal family. Instead, they were here, in the middle of nowhere, guarding a tower. Ned brought 6 men with him: Lord Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Cassell, Theo Wool, Mark Ryswell, Howland Reed. All of them were good men, skilled fighters, loyal to the bone. The fight that followed became legend, 7 against 3. But these were no ordinary 3. Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, wielding Dawn, the legendary blade forged from a fallen star. Sir Oswell Went, a skilled and experienced knight, and Lord Commander Gerald Hightorn, the White Bull, one of the finest warriors of his generation. When it was over, all 3 Kingsguard were dead. So were Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Wool, and Mark Ryswell. Only Ned and Howland Reed survived, and Ned always insisted that he would have died too if not for Howland. What exactly Howland did, Ned never said. But something turned the tide of that battle. Inside the tower, Ned found Lyanna. She was dying, lying in a bed of blood. What they spoke about, what she told him, what promise he made her, remained Ned's secret for the rest of his life. All anyone knew was that Lyanna died in Ned's arms, and that he emerged from that tower a changed man, carrying grief that would never fully heal. Ned returned to Winterfell with Lyanna's bones and a bastard son. Jon Snow, he said, born of a tavern wench named Willa, or perhaps another woman. Ned's story changed slightly over the years, as if he could not quite keep the lie straight. His new wife, Catelyn Tully, whom he had married to secure the Riverlands alliance during the war, was hurt and angry. Ned had dishonored her before their marriage was even properly begun, or so it seemed. But Ned would not send Jon away. He raised the boy at Winterfell, alongside his true-born children. He ensured Jon was educated, trained in arms, treated with respect. He would not speak of Jon's mother, not even to Catelyn, not even when it damaged their marriage. This secret was a wound in Ned's household, a constant reminder that even the most honorable man could fall. As Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, Ned ruled justly. He personally executed criminals, never delegating that duty to another. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, he believed. If you would take a life, you should look into their eyes and hear their final words. This was the Northern way, and Ned embodied it completely. He raised his children to understand honor and duty. Robb, his eldest, was groomed to inherit Winterfell. Strong, brave, and good-hearted, Robb learned to command men, and dispensed justice. Sansa, his eldest daughter, dreamed of southern nights and courtly romance. Arya, wild like Lyanna, had been rejected needlework in favor of swordplay. Bran loved to climb and dreamed of being a knight. Rickon was still young, still learning what it meant to be a Stark. And Jon Snow, the bastard, trained alongside Robb, loved by his siblings except Catelyn, never quite belonging, but never fully excluded either. Jon grew up with the weight of bastardry on his shoulders, knowing he could never inherit, never marry a highborn lady, never be truly legitimate. But Ned treated him with kindness, and that made all the difference. For 15 years, Ned ruled the North in peace. He avoided the intrigues of King's Landing. He maintained the Stark traditions. He ensured the Night's Watch received support and recruits. He settled disputes between his bannermen. He prepared for winter, always winter, because winter was always coming, but peace could not last forever. When Jon Arryn died under suspicious circumstances, Robert came north to ask Ned to be his new Hand of the King. Robert was no longer the strong young warrior Ned had fought beside. He was fat, drunk, unhappy in his marriage to Cersei Lannister, and increasingly unable to manage the realm. He needed Ned. He needed someone he could trust in a capital full of vipers. Ned did not want to go. Winterfell was his home. The North was his responsibility. King's Landing was 1,000 miles away, a different world with different rules. But Robert was his friend, his king, and Jon Arryn's death needed investigation. So Ned agreed, making a choice that would destroy everything he loved. The journey south was the last time the Stark family would be whole. Ned took Sansa and Arya with him, planning to make good matches for them in the capital. He left Robb in charge of Winterfell, trusting his heir to rule wisely. Catelyn stayed behind initially, caring for Bran, who had fallen from a tower and lay in a coma. Jon Snow went north to join the Night's Watch, choosing a life of service over the uncertainty of being a bastard in his father's house. King's Landing was everything Ned had feared, a city built on lies and secrets, where everyone smiled and schemed and no one could be trusted. The small council was full of men who served themselves first and the realm a distant second. Cersei hated Robert and made no secret of it. Littlefinger, the master of coin, played games within games. Varys, the spider, whispered in everyone's ears and claimed to serve the realm while serving only himself. Ned began investigating Jon Arryn's death, following the same path Jon had walked. He discovered that Jon had been researching Robert's children, visiting bastards, reading about inheritance and the lineages of great houses. Slowly, carefully, Ned uncovered the truth, a truth so dangerous that it had gotten Jon Arryn killed. Robert's children were not his children. All three of them, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, had blonde hair and green eyes, Lannister features. Not one of them showed any trace of Baratheon blood. Baratheon blood was strong. Every bastard Robert had ever fathered had black hair and blue eyes. Every single one. The odds of all three legitimate children having no Baratheon features were impossible unless they were not Robert's children at all. Cersei had been sleeping with her brother Jaime. The children were products of incest. Joffrey, who would inherit the Iron Throne when Robert died, had no claim at all. He was a bastard born of the most unnatural union imaginable. This was the secret that Jon Arryn had discovered. This was why he had died. And now Ned knew it too. A wiser man would have kept silent. A more pragmatic man would would have used this information as leverage, trading it for power or position. But Ned Stark was neither wise nor pragmatic in the ways of Southern politics. He was honorable, and honor demanded that he tell Robert the truth. But before he could, Robert was injured in a boar hunting accident. Drunk as usual, he was gored by a wild boar and mortally wounded. On his deathbed, Robert asked Ned to serve as regent until Joffrey came of age. Ned agreed, but he changed Robert's words. Where Robert wrote, "My son Joffrey," Ned wrote, "My heir," leaving the succession open, planning to reveal the truth after Robert died. It was a half measure, a compromise between honor and pragmatism, and it satisfied neither. If Ned had truly been honorable, he would have told Robert the truth while he lived. If he had truly been pragmatic, he would have seized power immediately and dealt with the Lannisters before they could react. Instead, he did neither, and that hesitation doomed him. Ned went to Cersei privately. He told her he knew the truth about her children. He gave her a chance to flee, to take her children, and escape before Robert died, and the realm learned what she had done. He did this out of mercy, not wanting to see children punished for their mother's sins. He thought he was being kind. Cersei saw weakness. She saw an enemy who had given her time to prepare, who had revealed his hand before he was ready to strike. She moved first. When Robert died, she had Ned arrested. She declared Joffrey king, and she seized control of the capital before Ned could rally any opposition. Ned's men urged him to seize power. They told him to strike first, to secure the throne for Robert's true heir. But Ned refused. He would not start a war in the streets of King's Landing. He would not risk innocent lives. He trusted in honor, in the rule of law, in the idea that truth and justice would prevail. He was wrong. Littlefinger, whom Ned had foolishly trusted, betrayed him. The City Watch, whom Ned had counted on, turned against him. And suddenly, Ned was a prisoner, charged with treason, his men dead or scattered. In the throne room, surrounded by enemies, Ned was given a choice. Confess to treason, swear loyalty to Joffrey, and be allowed to take the Black and join the Night's Watch. Or refuse and be executed along with his daughter Sansa, who Cersei held hostage. For his daughter's sake, Ned confessed. He stood before the entire court and lied. He said he had plotted to steal the throne. He said Joffrey was the rightful king. He dishonored himself, broke his word, became everything he had always despised. And he did it to save his daughters. But Joffrey was not his mother. Joffrey was cruel and stupid and vicious. When Ned finished his confession, when he knelt waiting to be sent to the wall, Joffrey smiled, and he ordered Ned's execution. Sir Eilen Payne drew ice, Ned's own greatsword, the Valyrian steel blade that had been in the House Stark for generations. And in front of the horrified court, in front of his screaming daughter, Ned Stark was beheaded. The North's Lord was dead, killed by the lies and treachery of King's Landing, killed because he was too honorable to play the Game of Thrones effectively, killed because he tried to do the right thing in a place where right and wrong meant nothing. News of Ned's death reached Winterfell like a thunderbolt. Robb, barely more than a boy, called his banners. The North rose in fury. Every house, every lord, every fighting man who could hold a sword marched south, ready to avenge their murdered lord. The young wolf they called Robb, and they declared him king in the North, breaking away from the Iron Throne, reclaiming the crown that Torrhen Stark had given up 300 years before. House Stark had fallen. The Lord was dead. His daughters were captives. His sons were scattered. Winterfell would soon burn. Everything Ned had built, everything he had protected, was being destroyed. But the wolves were not finished. Not yet. The Game of Thrones had taken Eddard Stark, but his children remained, and they would prove that honor, while it might get you killed, was still worth dying for. Winter was coming, and the North remembered. The execution of Eddard Stark shattered House Stark like a stone thrown through ice. What had been whole was now broken, scattered across the entirety of Westeros and beyond. Each of Ned's children faced their own nightmare, their own impossible situation. The wolves of Winterfell were alone, separated from their pack, forced to survive in a world that had suddenly become far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Robb Stark was the first to act. When word of his father's death reached Winterfell, Robb was only 15 years old, barely a man by northern standards. But he was Lord of Winterfell now, the heir, the last Stark man in the north, with Jon Snow having taken the Black and Bran and Rickon still children. The weight of leadership fell on Robb's shoulders like a mantle of iron, and he bore it the only way he knew how, with action. The Northern Lords came to Winterfell expecting a boy. They found something else. Robb called his banners, and every house answered. The Karstarks came from their keeps. The Umbers marched from Last Hearth. The Mormonts sailed from Bear Island. The Manderleys brought their strength from White Harbor. Even the mountain clans descended from their high places, led by chiefs who remembered oaths sworn to House Stark in the age before memory. They marched south, 20,000 strong, an army of hard men from a hard land, veterans of fighting wildlings and surviving winters that would kill southern soldiers. They marched for vengeance. They marched for justice. They marched for Ned. At Moat Cailin, Robb was joined by his mother's people. The River Lords, led by Catelyn's brother Edmure Tully, were already at war with the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister's armies had invaded the Riverlands, burning and pillaging. The Tullys needed allies. The Starks needed revenge. The alliance formed naturally. Robb proved himself almost immediately. At the Whispering Wood, he caught Jaime Lannister's army by surprise. The Kingslayer, who had never lost a battle, was captured. Thousands of Lannister men were killed or taken prisoner. Then, at the Battle of the Camps, Robb shattered the besieging forces around Riverrun, lifting the siege and securing the Riverlands. Victory after victory followed. The young wolf, they called him, and the name fit. Robb was brilliant in the field. He understood tactics, understood how to use terrain and surprise. He listened to his advisors, but made his own decisions. He led from the front, fighting alongside his men, earning their loyalty through shared danger rather than inherited right. And then, in a moment that would change everything, the Northern Lords made their choice. They would not fight to put Stannis or Renly Baratheon on the Iron Throne. They would not bow to any Southern king. The North had been its own kingdom for thousands of years before the conquest. It would be so again. Lord Greatjon Umber drew his sword and proclaimed Robb Stark the king in the North. Every other lord followed. They knelt before Robb, swore their oaths, and declared independence. Robb Stark was now fighting a war on two fronts, against the Lannisters, who held his sisters hostage and had murdered his father, and against everyone else, because by claiming kingship, he had made himself a traitor to whoever eventually won the Iron Throne. But Robb's greatest weakness was not military. It was personal. He was his father's son, raised on honor and duty. When he met Jane Westerling, a daughter of a minor Western house, and sought comfort with her after learning that Bran and Rickon were supposedly dead, his honor would not let him simply walk away. He had been promised to a Frey girl, part of the bargain to cross the Twins and reach the south. But Robb married Jane instead, breaking his oath to Walder Frey. This decision would doom him. Walder Frey was not a forgiving man. The Freys were proud, easily insulted, and had long memories, and they were strategically essential. The Twins controlled the crossing of the Green Fork, the fastest route between the north and the south. Without Frey support, Robb's strategic position became impossible. But that tragedy still lay in the future. For now, Robb fought on, winning battles while slowly losing the war. His men loved him, his enemies feared him, and he tried desperately to be the king his people needed, while also being the son his father had raised. Sansa Stark's nightmare was different. She was trapped in King's Landing, a hostage in all but name. She had once dreamed of the capital, of gallant knights and courtly romance. Those dreams died on the steps of the Sept of Baelor when she watched her father executed. Joffrey, the boy she had once thought she would marry, revealed himself to be a monster. He forced Sansa to look at her father's head, mounted on a spike above the walls. He had his Kingsguard beat her when she displeased him. He tormented her with promises that he would kill Robb and show her his head as well. And through it all, Sansa had to smile, curtsy, and pretend to be the loyal subject. She learned to survive through courtesy. She became the perfect lady, always saying the right thing, never revealing what she truly felt. She praised Joffrey even as she fantasized about pushing him off walls. She thanked the Lannisters for their mercy, even as she mourned her father and brother. She became a player in the Game of Thrones without even realizing it, using her only weapons, courtesy and patience, to stay alive. Tyrion Lannister, the imp, showed her unexpected kindness. He stopped Joffrey from having her beaten. He spoke to her with something approaching respect. But Sansa could not trust him. He was a Lannister, and the Lannisters had destroyed her family. Later, when Joffrey cast her aside to marry Margaery Tyrell, Sansa was married to Tyrion instead, a political arrangement designed to give the Lannisters a claim to the north. Tyrion, to his credit, did not force himself on her. He treated her gently, tried to make the best of an impossible situation. But Sansa could not see him as anything other than her captor, regardless of his personal kindness. Then came Joffrey's wedding. The Purple Wedding, it would be called later. Joffrey choked to death at his own feast, poisoned by persons unknown. Tyrion was accused, and Sansa, with help from Littlefinger, escaped King's Landing entirely. She fled to the Vale, to the Eyrie, where Littlefinger revealed his plans. He had killed Lysa Arryn, his own wife, and now controlled the Vale through Lysa's son Robin. And he wanted Sansa, not just politically, but personally. He was obsessed with her, seeing in her the image of her mother Catelyn, whom he had loved hopelessly his entire life. Sansa learned from Littlefinger. She watched how he manipulated people, how he turned enemies against each other, how he always positioned himself to benefit regardless of who won. She learned that courtesy could be a weapon, that information was power, that survival required constant vigilance and careful planning. The girl who had dreamed of songs and nights was dying, in her place, something harder was emerging. A woman who understood that the Game of Thrones was real, that honor could get you killed, and that sometimes the only way to survive was to become the thing you once despised. Arya Stark's journey was darker still. She escaped King's Landing during the chaos of Ned's execution, rescued by Yoren of the Night's Watch. He cut her hair, dressed her as a boy, and took her north with a group of recruits. But the war caught up with them. Lannister men attacked, looking for Gendry, King Robert's bastard. Yoren died defending his charges. Arya survived. She was captured and taken to Harrenhal, the cursed castle that Aegon's dragons had melted. There she served as a cupbearer, first to Tywin Lannister himself, then to Rose Bolton. She witnessed horrors, torture, murder, casual cruelty. She saw what war did to people, how quickly civilization collapsed into savagery. Jaqen H'ghar changed everything. A mysterious man from Braavos, a member of the Faceless Men, he owed Arya a debt. 3 lives, he said. She had saved him and 2 others from a burning wagon. Now he would kill 3 people of her choosing. Arya chose carefully, using her gifts to survive, to help her friends, to strike back at her enemies in small ways. When Jaqen left, he gave her a coin and a phrase. Valar Morghulis, he said. All men must die. If she ever needed to find the Faceless Men, she should give the coin to any man from Braavos and speak those words. Arya escaped Harrenhal. She tried to reach Riverrun, where her brother Robb was fighting. She was captured by the Brotherhood Without Banners, a group of outlaws who claimed to serve justice. They released her to the Hound, Sandor Clegane, who planned to ransom her to her family. But everywhere Arya went, her family stayed just out of reach. She arrived at the twins just in time to witness the Red Wedding. She saw her brother's wolf murdered. She heard the sounds of slaughter. She could not save Robb or Catelyn. She could only watch as House Stark was butchered by the Freys and Boltons. The Hound took her to the Vale, planning to ransom her to Lysa Arryn. But Lysa was dead. Arya laughed, a horrible, broken laugh. Because of course, Lysa was dead. Everyone was dead. Her father, her mother, Robb, everyone she loved was being taken from her. So Arya made a choice. She took the coin Jaqen had given her. She found a Braavosi ship captain and spoke the words, Valar Morghulis, and she sailed across the narrow sea, leaving Westeros behind, going to Braavos to find the Faceless Men and learn to become no one. In the House of Black and White, Arya began her transformation. She learned to lie convincingly. She learned to change her face, literally wearing the faces of the dead. She learned to kill silently, efficiently, without emotion. The Faceless Men served the many-faced god, the god of death. They were assassins, but they saw themselves as holy servants, granting the gift of death to those whose time had come. Arya struggled to become no one. She could not let go of herself, of her identity as Arya Stark. She kept her possessions, her sword needle that Jon had given her. She kept her list of names, people she meant to kill. Cersei, the Mountain, Walder Frey. The list grew shorter as some died, but she never forgot. She was becoming something new, not truly a faceless man, because she could not surrender herself completely, but not the girl she had been either. Something in between, a weapon, a killer, a wolf in human skin. Bran Stark's journey was the strangest of all. After his fall from the tower, after Jaime Lannister pushed him to keep him from revealing the secret of the Lannister children, Bran woke with his legs broken beyond repair. he would never walk again, never be a knight. All his childhood dreams were shattered, but other gifts emerged. He began to dream strange dreams. He saw through the eyes of his direwolf, Summer. He witnessed events he should not have been able to see. An old woman came to Winterfell. Old Nan's tales took on new meaning. The three-eyed crow appeared in his dreams, telling him he must fly. When Theon Greyjoy betrayed Robb and seized Winterfell, Bran and Rickon escaped with the help of Hodor, a simple-minded giant of a man, and the Reeds, Meera and Jojen. The Reeds understood what Bran was becoming: a greenseer, a warg, someone touched by the magic of the old gods. They fled north, beyond the wall. Jojen had seen it in his green dreams. Bran needed to find the three-eyed crow. So they went into the haunted forest, into the lands where the others walked, seeking something Bran did not fully understand. The journey was hard. They faced the cold, the elements, the creatures of the far north. Jojen grew weaker, his green dreams taking a toll. Meera protected them all. Hodor carried Bran on his back, never complaining, never questioning. Finally, they found what they sought. In a cave beneath a weirwood tree, the three-eyed crow waited. But he was not a crow. He was a man, or had been once. Now he was part of the tree, roots growing through him, connecting him to every weirwood in Westeros. He was the last greenseer, the last of his kind, and he had been waiting for Bran. Bran began his training. He learned to extend his consciousness through the trees, to see through the carved faces, to witness events across vast distances, and even across time itself. He saw his father as a young man. He saw the past of Winterfell. He saw things that had been forgotten for thousands of years. But there was a price. The more time Bran spent in the trees, the less human he became. He was leaving his body behind, becoming something else, something ancient and powerful and utterly inhuman. The three-eyed raven was not training Bran to be a man. He was training him to be the next guardian of memory, the keeper of all the histories of the first men and the children of the forest. Rickon, the youngest, disappeared into the confusion. He was taken to Skargos by the wildling woman Osha, hidden away where he might be safe. A Stark in reserve, perhaps, if all the others died. But Rickon was too young to play the game, too innocent to understand what was happening to his family. He could only wait and hope that someone would remember him eventually. The Stark children were scattered across the world. Robb fighting a war, he was winning battle by battle, while losing strategically. Sansa a prisoner, learning to play the Game of Thrones. Arya across the sea becoming a weapon. Bran beyond the wall, becoming something inhuman. Rickon hidden on a cannibal island. Jon Snow at the wall, having sworn vows that bound him for life. House Stark had fallen. Winterfell burned. The Lord was dead, but the children survived. Each of them was changing, adapting, becoming whatever they needed to be to endure. The wolf blood ran strong in them, and wolves knew how to survive even when separated from the pack. The Game of Thrones had broken them apart, but it had not broken them. Not yet. They were Starks, and Starks endured. Winter was coming, and when it came, the scattered wolves would remember what they were. They would remember their names, their home, their duty. They would remember that the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. The North remembers. And the North was not finished, not while a single Stark child still lived. Jon Snow never wanted to be a bastard, but he never had a choice. From the moment he was born, his fate was sealed. He would never inherit lands or titles. He would never marry a high-born lady. He would always be the stain on Eddard Stark's honor, the proof that even the most righteous man could fall to temptation. So when the opportunity came to join the Night's Watch, to take the black and find purpose in service, Jon seized it. The wall was supposed to be his salvation, a place where birth did not matter, where a bastard could rise on merit alone. The reality was harsher. The Night's Watch was not the noble order from the songs. It was a dumping ground for criminals, rapers, thieves, and unwanted sons. Jon arrived expecting to find brothers dedicated to defending the realm. He found broken men serving life sentences for crimes they could not escape. But Jon adapted. He made friends. Samwell Tarly, a coward by his own admission but kind and loyal. Pip and Gren, common-born but true. He earned the respect of Lord Commander Jorah Mormont. He was chosen as a steward, a position that seemed like an insult until Jon realized the stewards to the Lord Commander were being groomed for leadership. Then his world shattered. News came from the south. Ned Stark was dead, beheaded as a traitor. Robb had been crowned king in the north. The realm was at war, and Jon was stuck at the wall, bound by vows that forbade him from taking part in the affairs of the kingdom. Jon tried to desert. He rode south, ready to abandon his vows and join Robb's war. But his friends brought him back. They reminded him of the words he had spoken. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. Those were not empty promises. They were sacred oaths, and Jon Snow, Ned Stark's son in all the ways that mattered, could not break an oath. So Jon stayed. He ranged beyond the wall with the Lord Commander. He fought the dead when they rose in the haunted forest. He saw a White Walker, those legendary creatures from the long night, and realized that the real war was not in the south. The real war was here, against an enemy that humanity had forgotten, an enemy that could raise the dead and turn them into mindless servants of the cold. Jon was captured by wildlings. He fell in love with Ygritte, a spearwife with red hair and a fierce spirit. She taught him that the wildlings were not the savages he had been taught they were. They were the free folk, people who refused to kneel, who valued freedom above all else. They had their own honor, their own codes, their own way of life. But Jon could not abandon the Night's Watch. When the time came, he betrayed the wildlings and returned to Castle Black. Ygritte died in the battle that followed, shot by arrows while Jon watched helplessly. She died in his arms, whispering that he knew nothing. And she was right. Jon knew nothing about love, about duty, about the impossible choices that leadership demanded. The wildlings attacked the wall in force, 100,000 strong, led by Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. They were not invading out of greed or ambition. They were fleeing, running from the White Walkers and the army of the dead that was coming. They needed to get south of the wall, or they would all die. Jon defended Castle Black. He led the defense when all the officers were dead or wounded. He fought giants and climbers and raiders. And when Stannis Baratheon arrived with his army and shattered the wildling forces, Jon was the one who negotiated with Mance, who understood that the free folk were not the enemy. The Night's Watch elected Jon as their Lord Commander, the youngest Lord Commander in living memory. 998th, Lord Commander of an order that stretched back 8,000 years. The honor was immense. The burden was crushing. Jon inherited a watch that was dying, They had barely 1,000 men to defend 300 miles of wall. Their castles were falling apart. Their supplies were running low. And the real enemy, the White Walkers, were coming. Jon made hard choices. He let the wildlings through the wall, not as invaders, but as refugees. He gave them land south of the wall in exchange for their help defending it. Many of his own men hated this decision. They had fought wildlings their entire lives. They had watched friends die to wildling arrows. And now Jon was making peace with them. But Jon understood something his men did not. The White Walkers did not care if you were a crow or a wildling. They killed everyone. Every corpse became a soldier in their army. The only way to survive was to unite, living against dead, warm against cold, humanity against extinction. The decision made Jon enemies. His own steward, Bowen Marsh, wept as he plunged a knife into Jon's gut. For the watch, Marsh said. Other brothers joined him. They stabbed Jon repeatedly, leaving him bleeding in the snow. They killed him because they believed he had betrayed the Night's Watch. They killed him because they could not see the larger threat. They killed him because fear makes men do terrible things. But Jon Snow was not finished. Not yet. The mysteries surrounding his birth were about to be revealed. The secret that Ned Stark had kept his entire life. The reason he had dishonored himself and damaged his marriage. Jon Snow was not Ned's bastard. He was Lyanna Stark's son. And his father was Rhaegar Targaryen. Ned had found Lyanna dying in the Tower of Joy. She had not been kidnapped. She had gone willingly with Rhaegar. They had married in secret. And she had given birth to a son, a child with the blood of both the dragon and the wolf. Lyanna had begged Ned to protect her son. Robert would kill him if he knew the truth. Any child of Rhaegar's was a threat to his throne. So Ned had claimed Jon as his own bastard. He had dishonored himself. He had let his wife believe he had been unfaithful. He had let Jon grow up believing he was a shameful secret, all to keep Jon safe, all to honor his sister's dying wish. Jon was not a bastard. He was the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. He had a better claim to the Iron Throne than anyone else in Westeros. He was the heir to 2 great houses. He was the prince that was promised, the song of ice and fire made flesh. But Jon did not know any of this. Not yet. And even if he learned the truth, would it matter? He had lived his entire life as a bastard. He had sworn vows to the Night's Watch. He had no interest in thrones or crowns. He cared about survival, about defeating the White Walkers, about protecting the living. While Jon fought at the wall, his siblings were fighting their own battles. Sansa had finally escaped King's Landing's immediate threats, though she remained in Littlefinger's control in the Vale. She was learning to play the game, learning to use her courtesy as armor and her beauty as a weapon. She was no longer the naive girl who had dreamed of southern nights. She was becoming a player. Then the Boltons offered a marriage alliance. Ramsay Bolton, the bastard son of Roose Bolton, who had betrayed Robb at the Red Wedding, needed a Stark bride to legitimize his hold on the north. Littlefinger saw opportunity. He sent Sansa north to Winterfell to marry Ramsay and reclaim her home. It was a disaster. Ramsay was a monster who made Joffrey look tame by comparison. He tortured people for entertainment. He hunted women with dogs. He flayed his enemies alive. And Sansa was now his wife, trapped in her own home, suffering horrors she had never imagined. But Sansa was not the same girl who had been trapped in King's Landing. She endured, she survived, and when Theon Greyjoy, broken and tortured into a creature called Reek, helped her escape, Sansa fled into the northern winter. She was reclaiming herself, reclaiming her strength, and she would return to Winterfell one day, not as a victim, but as a Stark. Arya was across the narrow sea, training with the faceless men. She was learning to be no one, to surrender her identity and become a servant of the many-faced god. But Arya could not let go. She could not forget her list. She could not stop being Arya Stark of Winterfell. This failure to truly become no one eventually forced her to leave the faceless men. But she took their gifts with her. She knew how to change faces. She knew how to kill silently. She knew how to become invisible. And she had a list of names. People who had wronged her family. People who needed to die. Arya returned to Westeros. She went to the Riverlands first, where she learned about the Red Wedding, about her mother and brother's deaths. She learned about Walder Frey, the man who had betrayed guest right and murdered the Starks under his own roof. Arya infiltrated the twins. She served Walder Frey wine made from his own sons, whom she had killed and baked into pies, and then she slit his throat, watching him die as he realized what she had done. She avenged the Red Wedding, one name off her list. Then Arya turned north, toward home, toward Winterfell. The scattered wolves were beginning to return. Bran was beyond the wall, deep in his training with the three-eyed raven. He was learning to see through time, to witness events thousands of years in the past. He watched the children of the forest create the first White Walker, driving dragon glass into a man's heart to make a weapon against the first men. He saw that humanity's greatest enemy had been created by the very beings who had once been their allies. Bran was becoming something more than human. He could walk into Hodor's mind, control his body. He could see through the eyes of ravens across the entire continent. He could access the memories stored in every weirwood tree. He was becoming the living memory of the world. But the White Walkers found him. They attacked the cave. The three-eyed raven died, passing his power and responsibility to Bran. Jojen Reed died. Hodor died, holding a door closed so Bran and Meera could escape, his mind broken by Bran's warging across time. Bran destroyed Hodor by trying to save himself. The cost of power was measured in the lives of those who loved him. Bran and Meera traveled south, back toward the wall. Bran was no longer fully Bran. He was the three-eyed raven now, the keeper of all memory, the one who could see the truth of Jon Snow's parentage, the truth of the long night, the truth of everything. But he was also cold, distant, almost inhuman. The boy who had loved to climb was dying, replaced by something ancient and necessary. The wolves were returning to Winterfell. Jon, resurrected by the Red Priestess Melisandre, abandoned the Night's Watch. His vows had ended with his death. He was free, and he intended to retake Winterfell from the Boltons, to avenge his family, to restore House Stark. Sansa reached Castle Black and reunited with Jon. For the first time since they had all left Winterfell, two Stark children were together again. They were different now, harder, older, scarred by their experiences, but they were still Starks, and they were going home. Jon gathered an army, wildlings, loyal to him because he had saved them, northern houses, loyal to House Stark despite the Boltons' threats. They marched on Winterfell. The Battle of the Bastards followed. Jon against Ramsay Bolton. It was brutal, desperate, nearly lost. But the Knights of the Vale arrived, brought by Sansa, who had written to Littlefinger for help. The Boltons were crushed, Ramsay was captured, and Sansa fed him to his own hounds, the dogs he had used to hunt and terrorize so many others. Poetic justice, delivered by a woman who had learned that sometimes survival required becoming as ruthless as your enemies. Winterfell was retaken. The Stark banners flew once more. Jon was proclaimed king in the north, just as Robb had been. The northern lords bent the knee, not to a Targaryen or a Baratheon, but to a Stark, or to a Snow, at least, to the White Wolf, the man who had defended the wall and brought the wildlings south and understood the true threat. Bran arrived at Winterfell shortly after. He reunited with his siblings, though he was so changed they barely recognized the boy he had been. And Arya arrived last, slipping through the gates like a ghost, returned from the dead to find her home restored. For the first time since Ned Stark left for King's Landing, the Starks were together. Not all of them. Robb and Catelyn and Rickon were dead, but Jon, Sansa, Arya, and Bran were alive. They had survived the Game of Thrones, survived betrayal and torture and war. They had been scattered across the world, but they had come home. The pack was reunited, diminished, scarred, changed beyond recognition. But together, and together, the wolves were strong. Winter had come. The wall had fallen. The army of the dead was marching south. The great houses were still fighting amongst themselves, blind to the real threat. But in Winterfell, the Starks understood. They had always understood. Their words had warned them for 8,000 years. Winter is coming, and this time, winter might be the end of everything. But the Starks would face it as they always had, together, defending their home, defending the living, doing their duty no matter the cost. The wolves had returned, and the North remembered. 8,000 years. That is how long House Stark endured. From Bran the Builder raising the walls of Winterfell in the Age of Heroes, to Jon Snow standing atop those same walls as king in the North, the Starks survived everything the world could throw at them. Conquests, rebellions, winter after winter that killed thousands, the rise and fall of dynasties. Through it all, the direwolf banner flew over Winterfell, and the words remained unchanged. Winter is coming. But survival is not the same as victory. The cost House Stark paid for their endurance was measured in blood and grief and broken dreams. Every generation of Starks sacrificed something. Their crown, their lives, their innocence, their very humanity. The question that hangs over their story is simple and terrible. Was it worth it? To answer that, we must understand what House Stark represents in the larger story of ice and fire. They are not the richest house. That honor belongs to the Lannisters with their gold mines. They are not the most powerful in terms of raw military strength. The Reach can field larger armies. They are not the most magical or the most beautiful or the most clever. What the Starks have is memory. They remember what others have forgotten. They remember that the long night happened, that the others are real, that the wall exists for a reason. They remember their oaths, their duties, their responsibilities. They remember that winter comes, and when it does, only the prepared survive. This memory is both their greatest strength and their deepest curse, because remembering means you cannot ignore uncomfortable truths. You cannot pretend that threats do not exist simply because acknowledging them is inconvenient. You cannot play games with other people's lives because you remember that every decision has consequences, that every winter brings death, that every choice you make might mean the difference between survival and extinction for thousands of people. The other great houses play the game of thrones. They scheme and betray and alliance build and backstab because they see politics as a game where the prize is power and the cost of losing is merely humiliation or diminished status. The Starks do not play games. They cannot afford to. Because in the North, the cost of losing is not political defeat. It is death, starvation, freezing. Entire communities wiped out because someone made the wrong choice about where to store grain or how to ration supplies. This is why the Starks value honor so highly, not because they are naive or stupid or unable to understand that sometimes you need to compromise, but because honor in the Northern context means reliability. It means that when you give your word, people can trust it. And trust is the foundation of survival in a land where cooperation is the only thing standing between you and the frozen death. Eddard Stark's death is often pointed to as proof that honor is foolish in the Game of Thrones. And there is truth to this. Ned died because he refused to adapt to the Southern style of politics. He trusted Littlefinger. He warned Cersei instead of striking immediately. He confessed to treason rather than risk his daughter's life. Each decision was honorable. Each decision was also tactically foolish. And together, they killed him. But consider what Ned accomplished. He raised children who survived impossible odds. Robb became a brilliant military commander. Sansa learned to navigate the deadliest political environment in Westeros. Arya became a weapon capable of destroying her enemies. Bran became the living memory of the world. Jon learned to lead, to make impossible choices, to unite enemies against a common threat. Ned's honor did not save him, but it saved them, because he taught them what mattered, not winning at any cost, but staying true to who you are, even when it costs you everything. Each of his children faced moments where they could have abandoned their values and gained an advantage. And some of them did compromise, did adapt, did learn to survive in ways Ned never could. But none of them lost themselves completely. They remained Starks. Robb Stark's story is tragedy in its purest form. He won every battle and lost the war. He was betrayed at the Red Wedding not by military defeat, but by political failure. He broke his oath to Walder Frey. He married for love instead of duty. He lost the Karstarks by executing Lord Rickard Karstark for murder. Each decision was understandable. Each decision was even noble in its way. But together, they destroyed him. The Red Wedding violated one of the most sacred laws of Westeros. Guess right? The idea that once you have eaten bread and salt under someone's roof, you are protected, that your host cannot harm you without damning themselves. Walder Frey broke guess right. He murdered Robb, Catelyn, and thousands of northern men while they were his guests at a wedding feast. This violation shocked the entire realm. Even the Lannisters, who benefited from it, were disgusted. Tywin Lannister orchestrated it, yes, but he understood that guest right was a line that should not be crossed. The North would never forgive, never forget. The Freys and Boltons had won a battle but ensured their eventual destruction, because the North remembers. And the North did remember. Arya Stark murdered every male Frey involved in the Red Wedding. She wiped out the entire line. When Jon and Sansa retook Winterfell, they fed Ramsay Bolton to his own hounds. The vengeance was total and terrible, The Starks proved that you could scatter them, kill them, burn their home, but you could not destroy them. And if you tried, they would eventually destroy you. Jon Snow represents the culmination of House Stark's journey. He is literally the Song of Ice and Fire, the union of Stark and Targaryen bloodlines. He carries the ice of the north and the fire of the dragon in his very blood. And he embodies the central tension of the Stark story: duty versus desire, honor versus pragmatism, the individual versus the greater good. Jon did not want to be Lord Commander. He did not want to be king in the north. He did not want to lead or make impossible decisions. But he did it anyway because someone had to. Because the White Walkers were coming and humanity needed to unite or die. Jon understood what so many others did not: that the Game of Thrones was a distraction, that none of it mattered if everyone was dead. The revelation of Jon's true parentage creates an impossible situation. He is the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne. His claim is better than Daenerys Targaryen's, better than anyone's. But Jon does not want the throne. He never has. He was raised as Ned Stark's son, and he learned Ned's lessons well. Power is not a prize to be sought. It is a burden to be borne when duty demands it. Some fans theorize that Jon will ultimately have to choose between his Stark identity and his Targaryen blood, that he will have to decide whether he is ice or fire. But this is a false choice. Jon is both. He has always been both. His strength comes not from choosing one side or the other, but from integrating them, from being able to understand the rigid honor of the North and the ambitious fire of the Targaryens, and finding a path that honors both. There is another theory about Jon that has gained considerable support among readers: the Azor Ahai theory. According to ancient prophecy from Ashai, a hero will be reborn to fight the darkness. Azor Ahai, who wielded a burning sword called Lightbringer and drove back the White Walkers during the long night. The prophecy speaks of this hero being reborn amidst smoke and salt, waking dragons from stone, and being the prince that was promised. Jon's story parallels this prophecy in multiple ways. He was born during the chaos at the Tower of Joy. He was killed and resurrected. He has united enemies to fight the dead. Some interpret the prophecy to mean that Jon must sacrifice someone he loves, just as the original Azor Ahai killed his wife Nissa to forge Lightbringer. This creates a terrible question. If defeating the White Walkers requires Jon to kill someone he loves, would he do it? Could he? The Stark answer, historically, would be yes. Duty before love, the realm before the individual. Do what must be done, regardless of personal cost. But Jon has already died once for his duty. He has already sacrificed everything. How much more can be asked of one person? How much more can the Starks give before there is nothing left? Bran's transformation into the three-eyed raven represents perhaps the most extreme sacrifice any Stark has made. He gave up his humanity. He can see everything, know everything, but he cannot truly feel any more. He is memory incarnate, the keeper of all history, but he is no longer really Bran Stark. He is something else, something necessary, perhaps, but also something profoundly sad. There is a theory that Bran has been manipulating events throughout the entire story, that he can see through time, influence the past through his visions, and has been guiding everyone toward a specific outcome. Some even suggest that Bran was responsible for the Mad King's madness, whispering to Aerys through the weirwood trees, driving him insane with visions and voices. If this theory is true, it raises disturbing questions about fate and free will. Were all the Stark tragedies orchestrated by Bran to achieve some greater purpose? Did Ned have to die so Jon would join the Night's Watch and eventually become king in the North? Did Robb have to be betrayed so the North would unite under Jon? Did everything happen according to some grand design that only the three-eyed raven can see? The text does not give us definitive answers, but it does suggest that Bran has some ability to influence events. He certainly sees things no one else can see. He knows Jon's true parentage. He knows the origin of the White Walkers. He knows secrets that could change everything. How he uses that knowledge, and whether he has been using it all along, remains one of the great mysteries of the story. Sansa and Arya represent two different responses to trauma and powerlessness. Sansa learned to survive by adapting by becoming a player in the Game of Thrones, by using the weapons she had, courtesy and beauty and political intelligence. She learned from Cersei, from Littlefinger, from everyone who tried to use her, and she became someone who could not be used anymore. Arya learned to survive by becoming a weapon, by mastering violence, by taking control through the ability to kill anyone who threatened her. She rejected traditional femininity, rejected the role society wanted her to play, and carved out her own identity through blood and steel. Neither approach is entirely healthy. Sansa's courtesy is partly a mask covering deep trauma. Arya's violence has cost her pieces of herself, but both women survived. Both found ways to reclaim their agency in a world that tried to destroy them. And both represent the adaptability that has allowed House Stark to endure for 8,000 years. The themes that run through the Stark story resonate far beyond Westeros. Power versus morality. When is it acceptable to compromise your values to achieve a greater good? Ned refused to compromise and died. Robb made limited compromises and died. Jon has had to make terrible choices, sacrificing wildlings, abandoning the Night's Watch, accepting help from people he does not trust. Where is the line? How much can you bend before you break? Honor versus survival. The Starks value honor above almost everything, but honor can get you killed. So how do you maintain your integrity while also doing what is necessary to survive? This is the question every Stark child has had to answer, and each has answered it differently. The weight of history. The Starks are defined by their past, by 8,000 years of ancestors watching from the crypts, by the memory of the long night, by the responsibility they carry as wardens of the North and defenders of the Wall. This history gives them strength and purpose, but it also constrains them. They cannot simply walk away from their responsibilities because too many people depend on them. The cost of ambition. Every house that has tried to climb too high has fallen. The Targaryens were destroyed by their own madness and arrogance. The Lannisters may follow. Even the Starks, when they reached for the crown, when Robb declared himself king in the North, paid terribly for that ambition. The world of ice and fire is not kind to those who want too much. The indifference of the world. This is perhaps the darkest theme in the Stark story. The universe does not care about justice or honor or virtue. Good people die. Bad people prosper. Children suffer for their parents' mistakes. The righteous are not rewarded. The wicked are not always punished. The only constants are death and winter. And the only response is to keep going anyway. To do what is right. Not because it will be rewarded, but because it is right. So what is the legacy of House Stark? What does their 8,000-year journey tell us about the nature of power duty and survival in this brutal world? First, that endurance matters more than glory. The Starks are not the most celebrated house. They have no great songs about chivalry or romance, but they are still here when flashier, more ambitious houses have crumbled. They endured by being reliable, by doing their duty, by preparing for winter. Second, that honor is not weakness, even though it can get you killed. Ned's honor cost him his life, but it also created children who changed the world. Honor is not about personal survival. It is about creating something that lasts beyond yourself. The Starks have lasted 8,000 years, not despite their honor, but because of it. Third, their family is worth fighting for. The Starks were scattered across the world. Fourth, that some threats are too big to face alone. Jon understood this. The White Walkers cannot be defeated by one kingdom or one army. Humanity must unite, or it will die. This is the ultimate expression of the Stark philosophy. Survival requires cooperation, requires putting aside old grudges and working together, requires recognizing that we are all on the same side when facing extinction. And finally, that winter always comes. You can ignore it. You can pretend it is not happening. You can focus on your games and your schemes and your petty ambitions. But winter does not care. Winter comes whether you are ready or not. And the only question that matters is whether you prepared. The future of House Stark remains uncertain. The story is not finished. The White Walkers still march. The Game of Thrones still plays out in King's Landing. Jon, Sansa, Arya, and Bran are all alive, but they are all changed, scarred, broken in different ways, but they are still Starks. They still remember. And as long as one Stark remains, House Stark endures. If you have walked this long journey through Stark history with me, if you have felt the weight of 8,000 years of duty and sacrifice, I want to hear from you. Do you see the Starks differently now? Do you understand why they value honor, even when it seems foolish and sour? Do you think Jon will have to choose between his Stark and Targaryen identities, or can he be both? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the history and lore of Westeros and Essos, if you want to explore the stories of other houses, other characters, other mysteries buried in the text, then subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because winter is always coming, and when it does, we will face it together, with knowledge, with understanding, with memory. The North remembers, and so should we all. From Bran the Builder to Jon Snow, House Stark has been a shield guarding the realms of men. They built the wall. They held the North. They remembered when everyone else forgot. They sacrificed everything, over and over, generation after generation. Their story is not about winning. It is about enduring, about doing what must be done regardless of cost, about being the people who stand between humanity and the darkness, even when humanity does not appreciate it or even notice. 8,000 years, countless kings and lords and heroes, countless winters survived, countless threats defeated. The world has changed beyond recognition since Bran the Builder raised the first stones of Winterfell. But the Starks remain, diminished perhaps, bloodied certainly, but still standing, still enduring, still preparing for the next winter. Because winter is not just a season, it is a certainty. It is the universe's reminder that nothing lasts forever, that all things must end, that entropy always wins in the long run. But while the Starks live, while they remember, while they do their duty, humanity has a chance. Not a guarantee, just a chance. And sometimes, a chance is all you need. The rise of House Stark began with a man building a wall against the darkness. It continues with his descendants standing on that wall, facing the same darkness, armed with the same determination. The tools have changed, the world has changed, but the fundamental choice remains the same. Do you prepare for winter, or do you pretend it will never come? Do you face the hard truths, or do you live comfortable lies? Do you sacrifice for the future, or do you take what you can in the present? House Stark made their choice 8,000 years ago, and they have lived with the consequences, good and bad, ever since. That is their legacy. Not glory or gold or power, but preparation, memory, duty, the willingness to stand in the cold and the dark so that others might live in the light. Winter is coming. It has always been coming. And when it arrives, the world will need the Starks, just as it always has.